So I'm Alice from Director of Programs at the New South Wales Users and AIDS Association, and obviously joined by Amy Peacock, Associate Professor at NDARC. And today we're speaking about drug alerts in Australia. How do people who use drugs engage with, and what are their preferences for risk communications? Before we begin, I'd like to quickly acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge and pay respects to elders past and present. Recognizing sovereignty was never ceded, this was and always will be Aboriginal land. Additionally, it's really important for us to acknowledge the legacy of people who use drugs within research, and specifically the contributions of lived experience within this actual project. So, how do I change it? I didn't actually check. Yeah, so now I'm just on all the way over here, sorry. So the project involved a close collaboration between NUAA and NDARC, and that was established through a research team which comprises of both, a central research team which comprises of reps from both orgs. And the purpose there is to really ensure that people who use drugs are lived and living experiences, knowledges are actually really embedded throughout the entire research, rather than it just being somewhat tokenistic, which unfortunately it often sometimes happens when we're asked, NUAA's asked, or people who use drugs are asked about engaging in research. So to ensure that didn't happen, we created a close collaboration, and that also means that any outputs from the results, we have the opportunity to ensure that they're really accessible to and meaningful for people who use drugs themselves. So I'm sure everyone in the room knows what drug alerts are, but just in case, I'm going to do a quick refresher in that drug alerts are released by health agencies and they're about higher risk substances circulating in local illicit markets. And it's a way to promote harm reduction behaviors and allow people who use drugs to make informed decisions about their own drug use. And just quickly, I'm sure everyone's seen one, but there's just some examples if you've not seen one. There's a newer alert about high-dose MDMA, a high-dose MDMA alert from New South Wales Health, and a Victorian Health alert about fake Xanax or counterfeit Xanax. And while drug alerts are increasingly being released by health agencies across all Australian jurisdictions, it's still very much this practice here is in its infancy, as well as we don't have a comprehensive guidelines or advice around how to release alerts, and we don't know, or we have very little knowledge about how people actually engage with alerts. And so that was where this study came in. And that's that we're seeking to better understand how people engage with alerts in the actual wild, so to speak. So we conducted a cross-sectional online survey of people who use drugs, and that was exploring their awareness of responses to and preferences for alerts. The survey was designed in consultation with two reference groups. So the first was a reference group of people with lived and living experience, as well as a reference group with people who work in the dissemination of alerts, as well as early warning systems. So we ran the survey from June to September this year, and we had 575 eligible, responses. And half the participants, about half, were female. People predominantly lived on the East Coast, so New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. The greatest proportion of responses indicated that the largest group of people had used drugs monthly or less often in the past 12 months, but 1 in 5 reported daily use. Stimulants, particularly methamphetamine, followed by cocaine and MDMA, were the most cited substances. But it's important to note that it's not just a group of people who use stimulants, it's also around 1 in 5, sorry, I'm going to have to consult my paper here. Around 1 in 5 had used pharmaceutical opioids extramedically, and 1 in 10 had used heroin in the past 12 months, as well as 1 in 5 people had received some form of drug treatment in the past year. And it's
Neat. Thanks, Alice. So moving on to more of the results. So what we found was that 77% of our sample reported seeing a drug alert in the last 5 years. And the majority of them, so 4 and 5, said they'd seen an alert in the last year. So this is a group that are really aware of alerts. We asked them lots of information about the last alert that they'd seen. So when we talked about their last alert with them, most of them said that they'd seen alerts about MDMA, so high or variable dose MDMA or MDMA containing other drugs, followed by methamphetamine or cocaine last time. Good news story is that over half of people said that they shared the alert with someone else after seeing it. And when we asked people about what they remembered from the alert, of those who said they remember the harm reduction information that was in the alert, the majority said that that information then informed their use behaviour afterwards. In saying that, 2 in 3 people who'd seen an alert said they wanted more information after seeing the alert. They wanted to know how to get hold of reagent kits, how to access naloxone. They wanted to know if the drugs they were using actually matched up with the drug in the alert. Looking at their behavioural responses after seeing the alert, if you focus on the pie chart, we're talking here, these results are specific to people who'd used the drug type broadly that was mentioned in the alert. So we focus this analysis, say, for example, on people who'd ever used MDMA who'd seen an MDMA alert. What we can see in the orange here is that 2 in 5 people said that they did not change their behaviour after seeing the alert. Now, that might make you think that alerts aren't doing anything, but when we dug into that a little bit more, half of them said they were already engaging in harm reduction behaviours. When we looked at the rest of that group, they said that, the alert wasn't really relevant to them, it was a different location or was a different drug type. When we asked about things like, did you have drug alert fatigue, or did it seem like the adverse effects weren't that bad? It was only less than a handful of people who endorsed those as reasons. So really, for the most part, it was that people were already engaged or it wasn't relevant to them. Looking at the other people, though, 1 in 5 said they stopped using the drug completely. Another 1 in 5 said they stopped or avoided using drugs that matched the alert. And then we saw in this darker blue at the bottom, 1 in 5 who continued to use but changed their use behaviours. And specifically, that was really around people engaging in more harm reduction behaviours, particularly changing their dosing behaviours, but also engaging in other harm reduction practices. Very few said that they increased their intake or engaged in other behaviours that might exacerbate the risk of harm. In terms of their preferences for future communication of drug alerts, over half of our sample were interested in knowing about future drug alerts, regardless of whether it was a drug that they used or a location for drugs in a location that was relevant to them. And this really reflects a broader desire for information that we saw among this sample. So as you can see in the pie chart here, people wanted more information, not just about drug alerts, but about broader drug trends in their area as well. Around 4 and 5 people said that drug alerts they thought should be triggered by overdose events. We asked them about a range of questions here in terms of what scenarios should it be if drugs are higher dose or a drug that wasn't expected was detected. And people were high in endorsing those scenarios, but they also said around half that they thought that peer reports of adverse events should inform drug alerts as well. So those more anecdotal reports. In terms of how people wanted to hear about these alerts, social media was a common way, but people also mentioned things like WhatsApp groups or mobile apps as well that were dedicated to alerts as being an avenue they'd be really interested in. In terms of credible sources for issuing of alerts, most people that we spoke to highly or completely, in terms of their rating of trust, most people said that they highly or completely trusted drug checking services or other harm reduction or peer services to issue credible alerts. If you want the comparison, so it was about 78 and 73% who said they highly trusted those services. When we asked about government health services, it was 48%. When we asked about law enforcement, it was 26%. Not a surprise there. And 72, when we asked people about what they thought alerts should do, 72% said alerts should empower people to make informed decisions, and 69% said that it should facilitate people to engage in harm reduction behaviours. So, take-home messages from these. First, we see a high awareness of drug alerts among this sample. Now, you may be thinking this was a study that you advertised about drug alerts. Of course, people who've seen drug alerts are probably going to take part. And also, it only represents, it's one group of people. It may not represent all people who use drugs. They are important considerations, but when we look at the other data that we're collecting at the moment, overall, it does show that we're seeing increasing awareness of drug alerts among different populations of people who use drugs, and particularly among people who are more engaged in the MDMA, cocaine, that more of the nightlife type scene, seeing higher rates of awareness there. The second point I'd make is that we're seeing a desire for information. People are sharing these alerts with others. They want more information after they see the alert. They want more information about drug trends in general. I think this is really useful for us to reflect on in terms of how we communicate more broadly with people who use drugs about what's going on. Thirdly, it tells us about what components of drug alerts are important, and people really want that harm reduction information within these drug alerts. And as we've seen from those results around who they trust and find credible, peer and harm reduction organisations are absolutely critical in the preparation and dissemination of those alerts as well. And finally, the final point I would make is that drug alerts can empower people to make informed decisions. As we can see from these results, people said that after receiving these alerts, they either changed their behaviour in a way that reduced risk, or they were already engaging in behaviours that were going to promote harm reduction. In saying that, I want to step back from drug alerts a bit. Maybe it's about the drug alerts, but maybe it's just about the information more broadly. Drug alerts are one tool in our toolbox, I guess. As we could see from these results, people wanted to know about their contents of their drugs. They wanted to know about drug checking. They wanted to know about naloxone. So I think drug alerts are one part of providing people with a broader array of information about the drugs that they're using. And that's all. If you want more, we're going to release results soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. So that we took more than 10 minutes there, but we are still ahead of the schedule overall. So I'll just see, is there anyone with any burning questions at this point? Otherwise, we can save it until the end. Anyone there? No, lovely. Thank you so much. That was fascinating.